Ada woke up in the dead of the night to the loud chirping of crickets, her head banging as the floor beneath her felt damp and strange. She sat up slowly as the world spun around her. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself as she looked around. Graves surrounded her, and the air smelled of wet grass and decay. She was in a graveyard, alone, and the thought of this filled her with dread. Ada could feel her heart race. Her clothes were so dirty, and her shoes gone. She touched her neck, realizing that her gold chain too was missing. The last thing she remembered was being at a party. The loud music and everything that happened at the party was now a blur. Where is everyone? She asked herself as she wondered where her friends were. Her friends T and K Y had been with her at the party, but now they were nowhere to be found. The silence of the graveyard was deafening as Ada staggered to her feet, her legs feeling so weak as she stumbled towards the gate and made her way out. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and no one seemed to be around. She caught sight of a signboard ahead of her and realized that she was now in Ogun State. How could this be? How did I get here? She asked herself, wondering how she got to Ogun State from Lagos. Ada's heart raced as she continued to walk. The night air clung to her skin, and every step felt heavier than the last. Her mind was a swell of confusion as Ada wondered what was happening. "Think, Ada, think," she whispered to herself as she reached into her pocket to grab her phone, but it wasn't there. She cursed underneath her breath, convinced that nothing about this night made any sense to her. Ada glanced around the empty road, but there were no cars in sight. Not a single soul was on the road at this time, as all Ada could hear was the chirping of the crickets. Ahead, a small wooden kiosk stood abandoned by the roadside. Ada stumbled towards it and sat on the bench that was stationed in front of the kiosk, trying to catch her breath. "I have to get back to Lagos," she said to herself, clutching her head in her hands. The throbbing pain in her skull made it hard to think straight. As she thought of what to do, she began to walk alone in the dark, and after hours of walking, she came across a truck which was heading to Lagos. Ada pleaded with the old man, who allowed her to hitch a ride with him, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, Ada found herself back in Lagos. She arrived at the apartment that she shared with her friends T and KY, who she expected to be fast asleep. "T, why?" she called out, but the apartment seemed silent like the graveyard. Ada's heart sank as she wandered through the small space in search of her friends. Their beds were still untouched, and Ada wondered where they could be. She collapsed onto the couch, her mind replaying fragments of the night before, wondering how she ended up alone in the graveyard. By midday, Ada couldn't wait any longer. She decided to go to Amaka's house, the rich girl who had thrown the party the night before. Amaka lived in a very large mansion in Lekki, and Ada had only been there a few times. When Amaka opened the door, she looked surprised to see Ada. "What are you doing here?" Amaka asked, folding her arms. "I need to find T and KY, Ada said. "We were at your party last night. Do you know where they are?" Amaka frowned. "Party? I didn't have a party last night." Ada stared in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "We were here. There was loud music. So many people. We were drinking and dancing." Amaka cut her off. "Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see you or your friends last night." Ada felt a chill run down her spine. Was Amaka lying? "Are you sure?" Ada pressed. Amaka rolled her eyes. "Look, I don't have time for this. If you're looking for your friends, maybe try calling them." Before Ada could say anything else, Amaka slammed the door in her face. 2 days passed, and Ada still hadn't heard from T or KY. She barely ate or slept, her mind consumed with worry. On the third day, she turned on the TV to distract herself, but the headline on the news made her blood run cold. "Two women found dead in Ogun State Graveyard," the anchor announced. Ada's breath caught in her throat. The screen showed an image of the graveyard where she had woken up. The anchor continued, "The bodies have been identified as T. Dean and KY. Ada's stomach churned. Her friends were dead. "No, no, no," she whispered, clutching her chest. Tears streamed down her face. The news anchor went on. "Police are investigating the cause of death. Early reports suggest foul play. Authorities are asking anyone with information to come forward." Ada turned off the TV and sank to the floor. Her hands shook as she tried to process what she had just heard. Later that evening, as Ada sat in the dark, there was a loud knock on the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. She hesitated before getting up and peeking through the peephole. Two men in police uniforms stood outside. Ada opened the door slowly as she stared at them. "Are you Ada Connor?" one of them asked. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "You're under arrest," the officer said, stepping forward. Ada's eyes widened. "Arrest? Why?" The officer held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was her purse. "This was found at the crime scene, ma'am. We need to ask you some questions." Ada's heart raced as she was escorted to the police van. At the police station, Ada sat in a cold, gray room. The officers bombarded her with questions. "What happened that night?" "I don't remember," she cried. "How did you get to the graveyard?" "I don't know," she replied. "Why were your belongings found near the bodies?" Ada shook her head, tears pouring down her face. "I swear I don't know anything. I didn't hurt them." One of the officers leaned closer. "You're the only survivor. That makes you our prime suspect." Ada buried her face in her hands. She felt trapped and hopeless, unable to remember how they got to the graveyard. In her prison cell, Ada tried to piece together the night of the party. The memories were scattered like broken glass in her mind. She remembered laughing with T and KY. She remembered drinking something sweet but strange. Then everything went dark. Ada began to regret her decision to leave her parents' home. She loved the good life, and she was the only child of her wealthy parents who never gave her the freedom to do as she pleased. Her father was extremely strict, always asking where she went and who she was hanging with. "You need to stop hanging out with these useless friends," her father would say, but Ada didn't listen. She loved clubbing, parties, and expensive clothes. She wanted freedom. So one evening, she returned home extremely late. Her father was waiting in the living room. "Ada, where have you been?" he asked, his voice stern. And Ada replied that she was out with friends. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked. Ada told him to stop shouting. "Stop shouting, Dad. I'm old enough to live my life," she snapped. Her father's face turned red. "As long as you live under my roof, you obey my rules and live by it." Ada rolled her eyes and stomped her room, not caring what her father was saying. Ada was always revolting against her parents, clamoring for freedom. The fight became worse, and one day, her father tried to confiscate her car keys. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he said firmly. And Ada snatched the car keys from him. "You can't control me, father. I'm not a robot." Her mother tried to calm the situation by urging her to listen to her father, but Ada proved stubborn. "I'm done with this house," she said as she made up her mind to move out. Her father's face fell in that instant. "Ada, don't do this to me," he said, reminding her of his current heart condition. But Ada didn't seem to care. She packed up all her belongings and left the house despite several pleas from her parents. Ada slammed the door in their faces as she moved in with T, her best friend. He was wild and loved partying as much as Ada did. Every night they dressed up and hit the clubs, drinking, smoking, and dancing till the first light of day. Now here she was, being accused of killing her friends. Ada struggled to sleep, her mind replaying the last moment she could remember. There was music. He had handed her a drink. It tasted strange, but sweet. Y had been laughing, but the laugh sounded distant, like it was happening in another world. Then darkness. Her parents were in the living room when a call came through. Ada's mother answered. "Hello, Mrs. Okuno," a man's voice said on the other end. "This is Inspector Olu from the Lagos Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that your daughter, Ada, has been arrested in connection with the homicide case. She is the prime suspect in the death of two women found in a graveyard in Ogun State." The words hit Ada's mother like a blow. "What? What did you say?" she stammered, gripping the edge of the table for support. Ada's father looked up sharply. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Ada's mother covered the receiver with her hand. "It's Ada. The police. They said that she's a suspect in a murder case." Her father's face turned pale. "What? That's impossible." He snatched the phone from her hand. "Inspector, this is her father. What are you saying about my daughter? The inspector repeated the information, his tone firm but apologetic. We found her belongings at the scene, and she was the only survivor. We need to investigate further. Ada's father's hands began to tremble. He clutched his chest. No, no, this can't be true. Ada would never. She's my little girl. Sir, I understand this is difficult, but we need her cooperation in this matter, the inspector said. Ada's father didn't hear the rest. His breathing became labored, his face contorting in pain. Emma! Ada's mother screamed, rushing to his side. Are you okay? What's happening? He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his chest, his breath shallow, his face drenched in sweat. Help! Somebody help! Ada's mother cried, her voice breaking as she tried to shake him awake. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Ada's father was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The doctors confirmed that he had suffered a fatal heart attack. Back home, Ada's mother was inconsolable. She sat in the hospital waiting room, her face buried in her hands. If only she hadn't left. If only she had listened, she muttered through her tears. Meanwhile, Ada was sitting in her prison cell when an officer came to inform her that she had a visitor. She was led to the visiting room, her heart heavy with dread. Her mother sat on the other side of the table, her face pale and drawn. Mama, Ada whispered as she took a seat. Her mother didn't speak for a long moment. She simply stared at Ada with a mixture of pain and anger. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, Your father is gone. Ada's heart dropped. What? Gone? What do you mean? Her mother's voice cracked as she replied, He had a heart attack the moment he heard you were a suspect. It was too much for him. Ada froze. The world around her seemed to collapse. She shook her head, her lips trembling. No, Mama, this can't be true. Papa can't be gone. I didn't do anything. Tears streamed down her mother's face. You left us. You left him. He warned you. He begged you, but you didn't care. I didn't know this would happen, Ada sobbed, clutching her chest. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Her mother slammed her hand against the table. Your selfishness killed him. You left us for that useless life, and now you've destroyed this family. Ada broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. Mama, please. I didn't want this. I love Papa. Her mother stood up abruptly, her face hard. You loved him? Then why didn't you listen to him? Why didn't you stay? Before Ada could reply, her mother turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing in Ada's ears, leaving her alone with the unbearable weight of her guilt. Days passed, and Ada remained the only suspect in the case. Amaka denied ever having a party, and the police struggled to gather more evidence. Ada felt trapped, her mind a swell of grief and guilt. Days turned into weeks, and Ada remained in custody. The evidence against her was strong, and with no memory of the events, she felt defenseless. Her belongings had been found at the crime scene, her friends were dead, and she was the only survivor. The police, the public, all believed that she was guilty. Ada's court date was set, and her mother refused to visit her again. She spent her days alone in her cell, replaying fragments of the party in her mind, desperately trying to recall what had happened. On the day of the trial, Ada sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the prosecution laid out their case. They painted her as a reckless young woman who had lured her friends into danger. They showed pictures of the crime scene, her purse, and her friends' bodies. Ada felt sick. She wanted to scream that she didn't do it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer tried to argue that Ada had been drugged and left unconscious, but without proof, it was an uphill battle. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the courtroom door suddenly opened. A woman rushed in, panting as she pleaded to be heard. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady, I have information that can change this case. The judge looked surprised. And who are you? My name is Florence, the woman said. I am a street vendor, and I saw what happened that night. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. Florence took the stand and began her testimony. She explained that she always passed by the graveyard on her way back home. So that night, she was walking home after selling food in her restaurant when she saw a black car stop near the graveyard. She found it strange, so she hid nearby and watched as two men got out of the car and dragged two unconscious women from the back seat and dumped them on the ground. She revealed that the men were laughing and saying to themselves that the girls deserved it. Then they returned to the car, brought out a third girl who seemed to still be alive. The woman revealed that they wanted to kill the third girl when she began to throw stones at them and made funny noises from where she hid, terrifying them as they ran away. She was too terrified to approach the girl as she didn't know what they were involved in, so she left her there, knowing that she was still alive. When she saw the news on the TV, she knew that the girl they were accusing of the crime was the same girl that she saw. She could not sit back and watch an innocent girl go down for a crime that she did not commit. So she had to come forward with the picture she took of the men that night. She handed her phone over to the judge with an image which clearly showed two men standing by a black car near the graveyard. One of the men had a distinct scar on his face. The judge examined the photo. "This is crucial evidence," he said, handing it to the prosecution. "Do the police have any leads on these men?" the judge asked. As the police swung into action to apprehend the men using the photo, they identified the two men and arrested them. Under interrogation, the men confessed to the crime. They admitted to drugging Ada, T, and KY at the party after T blew them off, saying that they weren't her class. They forced them into their car with hopes of teaching them a lesson. When T overdosed and didn't wake up, panicking, they decided to dump them in the graveyard and noticed that Ada was still alive. They tried to kill her, but were spooked before they could actualize their plan. The men's confession cleared Ada's name. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as the judge declared her innocent. Tears streamed down Ada's face as the judge ordered her immediate release. When Ada stepped out of the courtroom, the sunlight felt foreign on her skin after weeks in custody. Florence stood waiting, her warm smile offering comfort. "Thank you," Ada said, her voice trembling. "You saved my life." Florence placed a hand on her shoulder. "I only did what's right. You've been given a second chance. Don't waste it." Ada's mother stood by the car, her face a mix of relief and sorrow. Ada hesitated, unsure if she would be welcomed, but her mother stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," her mother whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mama," Ada sobbed. "I made so many mistakes. I never wanted any of this to happen." Her mother held her for a very long time before pulling back. "We'll get through this together." Back home, the absence of her father was unbearable. Ada visited his grave every day, kneeling in silence and whispering apologies. "Papa, I should have listened to you. I was so selfish. I promise I'll change. I'll make you proud." Her mother joined her one evening, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He loved you, Ada, despite everything. He believed in you. Honor his memory by becoming the woman he wanted you to be." Ada nodded, tears streaming down her face as she promised to be a better woman. And that was how Ada learned a valuable lesson never to take life and her loved ones for granted again. The lesson to be learned from this story is that choices have consequences, and selfish actions can hurt not only yourself, but those who love you. Ada's journey teaches the importance of listening to advice, valuing family, and recognizing the impact of one's behavior on others. It reminds us that freedom without responsibility leads to destruction, and that second chances must be embraced with humility and purpose.